So recently I made a video talking about Khatra and arrow spine, and that was specifically to address one of the myths or one of the misconceptions that Khatra allows you to ignore all arrow spine and therefore you can shoot any kind of arrow. If you haven't seen that video, link is over here, but the conclusion was arrow spine still matters. So while it does allow you to shoot a greater variety of arrows and make up for some of the inconsistencies with arrows, it still matters. So you can't just say shoot any arrow, Khatra solves everything. So today's video is going to cover a related but different problem and different misconception, and that is, well, do you even need Khatra? So here's the scenario which I'm imagining. You've just started to learn thumb draw, you've got your Asiatic bow or your horse bow, and you post a form check to Reddit. And I can almost guarantee that within a few hours, you'll get somebody saying, you should use Khatra. And they'll go on this huge, well-written post, multiple paragraphs talking about the history of Khatra, about what it's used for, the effects on the arrow flight. They'll probably link an Armin Herman video over here, and they'll say how Khatra completely changed the shooting and you should try it as well. It's like the solution to everything. Need more speed and power in your shot? Khatra. Arrows not flying straight? Khatra.
Allah have mercy. We have lost half of our men.
Khatra.
And all this advice is typically written with good intentions. Nobody is maliciously saying do Khatra to shoot worse. People will recommend advice and technique which works for them. And for many people shooting thumb draw, Khatra is an integral part of the shooting style which they would recommend people try. And a very big part of learning archery is to try. Don't be prejudiced in not wanting to try different things, because you need to experience different technique to understand what works for you. And many people today, especially in Asiatic archery, don't necessarily conform to a particular style. So while Khatra is taught in a particular stream of Asiatic archery, many people within Asiatic archery communities will shoot an amalgamation or a mix of different techniques based on what works for them. That's a really big fundamental rule. So with that in mind, should you be using Khatra? If someone says try it, should you use it? And this is as much a take on getting advice on trying Khatra as much as it is giving advice on someone to try Khatra. Understand firstly, foremost and fundamentally that any technique addresses a problem. This is for any style, any martial art even, that techniques exist to solve problems. Khatra solves a problem. Thumb draw solves a problem. And these approaches to solving problems will differ depending on where you go. So the question is, what problem does Khatra solve? So what often happens with the generic try Khatra advice is, again, you post a video of yourself shooting online, and then somebody jumps in and says, well, do this. And the problem with that is it's hard for a learner to understand why they need to do it. And it's even harder when they're not taught how to do it. So you end up throwing a lot of really bad shots and not understanding whether it's a problem with the technique, the problem with your execution. While there are many ways to execute Khatra, the problem that Khatra addresses is arrow flight. So when people advise others to try Khatra, but they haven't examined the arrow flight, what problem are they solving? You are offering a solution, but not framing the problem. So how do we frame the problem for the learner to see, so they experiment with Khatra to see what works for them? Now, you can do it the modern way by showing slow motion arrow flight, but not everyone has the capacity to see that, nor will they mount a GoPro on their heads to see their arrow flight. So the traditional way of doing this is through close distance, bare shaft shooting, something which we do in modern day archery as well. So we are standing very close to the target. This is Torba, which is about 1.5 meters away. You can roughly measure by extending your bow out to the target. And we shoot bare shaft. Now you can shoot fletched shafts, but the fletches will correct some of the arrow flight, but a bare shaft will tell the truth. So you shoot your arrows. I'll shoot with no Khatra, we'll see what happens. And we'll shoot a second one. And Torba, by the way, is when all arrows touch. I might not get it, so I'm just shooting randomly here. Oh, it is touching. Torba, but this is what you do. So we'll shoot several arrows, and that's Torba. Now, there are a couple of things to note here. Firstly, that's all touching, so I'm officially Toparchery. But secondly, is the straightness of the arrows isn't that bad. And these are bare shafts, which means that if they're feathered, then they will correct and straighten out. Now, this distance, it won't correct that much, but with no fletchings, it means the arrows will not correct. So at 1.5 meters at Torba practice distance, that's the arrow flight. And this is, surprisingly to me, fairly straight. Not perfect, but consistently straight. So if Khatra is meant to solve the problem of arrow flight, but my arrows are straight, bare shaft, then do I need to use Khatra? Now, just to compare, I'm going to do Khatra anyway. So I'm at Torba distance. Again, I'll shoot 3 arrows. I'm going to do a Khatra. I'm not sure if it's the right Khatra for this bow. I'll explain that later on. But I'm just going to throw my hand out and do Khatra. So first shot. Second shot. Oh, I got 2 arrows. Oh, well, second shot. You can see we've actually created a problem. So while my first 3 arrows here, my no Khatra shots, were fairly straight and consistent, this is much different. We've got one kind of off-centered shot, but the second shot really went off-center. And that is likely due to me doing Khatra poorly, or, might I say, not even needing to do it, but doing it anyway. The important thing to take away from this is, do you even need Khatra? Because, as you can see, some people will shoot fine without needing Khatra or adopting a particular form of Khatra. It doesn't stop me from learning it or experimenting, but it may be that my technique, my release, my bow, and my arrows happen to not require a particular Khatra. And that's what I want you to keep in mind. Does my setup require me to move the bow a certain way or to release the bow in a particular technique? And the answer may be no. And that's how people historically covered this issue. You will see different styles which address this problem. Gao Ying, for example, 1600s Ming archery, doesn't advocate a lot of bow hand movement. Now there is a bit of side Khatra or side movement with the bow for East Asian styles, so Japan, Korea, and China, for example, whereas the Middle Eastern styles, so the Turkish and Arab styles, tend to have more front hand movement. But the context is quite different. And that brings up another problem with the Khatra fundamentalists, the ones who push Khatra a lot, is we have to look past what some people might call dogma, where we teach a technique purely because it is in the book. The texts say Khatra is a thing people do, therefore everybody does Khatra. And that really misses out on the purpose, the framing of the problem. Khatra exists to solve a problem. And if you don't teach what the problem is, and you only teach a solution, then you are perhaps being a slave to dogma. And that's a question for us as teachers and instructors. Does everyone need to conform to the same style of shooting? If the style and technique solves the same problem, then maybe yes. But if it doesn't solve the problem, are we only introducing another layer of problems on top of that? Last weekend, a few days ago, I had the pleasure of going back to Archery Ascension, where we had Ahmed Karat from Maydaan Archery Club in Sydney to come down to teach some of the intermediate Toparchery archers. And what we did was we experimented with different techniques. We learned about different stances, different grips on the bow, and therefore different Khatras. And the big underlying note was, do what works for you. We wanted to experiment with different techniques. Some we were comfortable with, some we weren't. Some we found were better than what we had, some were not. One of the things which I retained from the session was the way in which Ahmed approached teaching people from different styles, because it wasn't a uniform club where everybody shot the same Ottoman style. There were members who shot Gao Ying, Ming style, but they were using Manchu bows and Manchu thumb rings, and the technique and equipment were very different. You wouldn't use that large Khatra movement with a large Manchu bow, because if you do that, you end up derailing the string. So again, different styles and cultures approach the problem in a different way. And while we encourage people to try a different technique, it was ultimately a personal choice. But what was important was the way we framed that. If he got the same arrow flight without needing to use Khatra with his technique, then there was no need to include Khatra. There are a couple of things to take away. One, Khatra is not useless. I'm not saying that. But number two, Khatra is not always useful. So we have to appreciate the context in which Khatra was developed. Khatra came from a time, place, region that required a clean arrow flight with inconsistent arrows to achieve further distance or high arrow speed, and that's why Khatra was used. Not every style approaches problem in the same way. And keep in mind that today, not everyone shoots Asiatic or thumb draw styles with the same frame. We're not shooting in Ottoman Turkish times with the same equipment. We're now using modern equipment with things like fiberglass bows and carbon arrows, where the problems which were evident back then are not so problematic today. So while we might teach Khatra as part of the Ottoman style, any Middle Eastern style of archery, not everyone needs it to the same degree. So you can adapt your release and technique or your Khatra to suit what you need. The important thing is, it's what you need. Not what the book tells you, not what some guy online tells you, not what I tell you, but what feels right for you. It's not just feeling though, it is based on what you will evaluate from your form. If I do this and I see my arrows are straight, then I might not need Khatra. But if you judge yourself differently, then maybe it will help you. As a footnote, I didn't script this video. I wasn't planning on doing it. I woke up this morning, wanted to talk about Khatra, wanted to wear my new shirt for no reason. But more importantly was that it made me reflect on my own technique. This was all done in a single take. This wasn't like I intentionally shot perfectly, I intentionally shot badly. I know for a fact that when I shoot certain bows, I shoot well with some and not well with others. I do tend to use the same Khatra for every single bow, even though the bows are different, the grips are different, and clearly, as you can see from my worn out arrow pass, some techniques work better than others. So when I've learned that maybe my particular follow through for this bow with these arrows is unnecessary. Maybe I just shoot straight with a forward Khatra or very slight side Khatra and achieve very good arrow flight. So that just reinforces the lesson that you really have to evaluate what works well for you. The problem is sometimes we don't know how to evaluate what works well for us. We judge by a subjective feeling, but really you can tell by the arrow flight. Again, if you can't tell from the flight and long distance, especially if you don't have a high-speed camera, but if you even do close range, shoot bare shaft. And again, we do it with modern archery. A bare shaft doesn't lie. It tells you where the arrow is going. That sort of thing is a better judge for what solution you need. If you know what the problem is, then you can solve it. Anyway, I do hope that helps. That was quite a bit of a circular talk, and we've covered quite a few things already. But Khatra is just so misunderstood that people keep saying, do it, do it, do it. But a proper instructor, a proper teacher will also tell you why you need to do it, and more importantly, when you don't need to. I hope that helps. Hope you find it interesting. Thank you all for watching. Do take care of yourselves, and hopefully we'll see you next time.